from empathizing to validation. So that's what they would do on a day-to-day basis. About 2 years, my parents just couldn't afford that thing anymore.
Yeah.
And then there was also just a bit of a culture shock, but it helped me.
Yeah.
And I'll get to the design piece now. And it just helped me kind of realize that then I was like back in the township and I was schooling with people from my neighborhoods, from other townships as well. And it was just a shock to the system initially, but it was also one of the biggest life lessons. I didn't like it at the time, but then retrospectively was one of the best things that happened to me in my life.
So like, how did that conversation start? Like, how did your parents say, Mpumelelo?
This thing, it just bothers.
Yeah, man. Here we are. Finally, we've got this conversation set up. We've been meaning to have this for a while now.
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, man. Welcome to Experience Design.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And I'm sure some people have came across some of the talks that you've been doing already with Experience Design.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it would be great just for us to have a conversation so that people can get to know who you are, what you're about, etc. Yeah. So I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask you, and I feel like that there are a lot that you've done in the design industry, and I feel like a lot of people can learn from your journey, and I think it's important like for us to have some like form of like contribution, and to empower and to motivate, inspire, those who keen to learn, and to grow in the space.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to have people like you, in the industry.
Cool.
Yeah. So man. I mean, the first question for me is before we talk about design, I want to know, who are you? Tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Mpumelelo Cindi. That's my full name.
Sure.
Pronounced Cindi, not Cindy.
Hmm.
And born and raised basically in Joburg, Gauteng, but more specifically, I'm from the East Rand.
Sure.
So grew up in the East Rand, in Katlehong, Vosloorus, that area.
Yeah.
So I was born in Katlehong, and then my parents moved to Vosloorus around early 90s.
Yeah.
During that hectic time in those IFPA and C type of eras.
Sure.
That's what marks that era where I'm from.
Yeah.
So whenever you speak about that, political unrest type of stuff.
Yeah.
So, so I grew up. Then I went to. So obviously, when I was still in Katlehong, started in township schools and so on, and then went on to, at some point, I guess my parents made a big jump and said we're gonna make a sacrifice and try and educate these guys.
Sure.
I think I went to CBC Boxburg for about 8 years, from when I was in standard 1 to standard 8, grade 10 for the for the new age. Man, and that's kind of the core of like my childhood was around that time. Growing up and going to CBC and. But just getting exposed really. It was a very pivotal time, I think, in my development.
And
being a black child coming from the township and going into private schools. And being exposed to other people, cultures, other races, and how they interact. Yeah.
Okay. And how was that for you? Like being exposed to that and then coming from a different background. How did you manage the two worlds?
Yeah, I think initially when you're young, I mean, you're still relatively young if you're in standard 1, grade 3, right?
Yeah.
You just kind of roll with the punches.
Yeah.
But I mean, you start to realize that you're in a different type of social space.
Yeah.
You're in a different type of social space. So maybe I'll speak to kind of two phases, like the earliest memories, kind of in that first year of interacting and realizing, oh shucks, now you're around kind of people of another color and so on.
Yeah.
Because we come back from like holidays, and they say write an essay about what you did over the holidays. You interpret it as a creative writing exercise. Because all you did was go to your grandmother's and push tires around the streets, and you can hear that some of the stories coming from other parts, from most parts of the classroom. People skiing, going on holidays, doing all sorts of exciting things. So
we're in France.
So you start to add some spice and try and make your story more exciting than pushing tires around the township. With your cousins and so on. So that was really kind of the first day where you start to realize that shucks, cool. There's something that's not quite the same. But I mean, I come from an environment. So like I said, why it's important for me to say I came from a politically unstable type of space. Because my dad was active in those spaces, so he kind of gave me already like a frame to say, no, things are like this and so on. But you don't really get them as a kid until they start to impact you directly. And then as I grew up, I think the second piece is just as you grow up, and you also grow up with the kids that you started with, I guess, in grade 1 or whatever, in grade 3. And you kind of start to see, the kind of socioeconomic differences start to be more glaring and more visible in your interactions. Who gets picked up by whose parents show up not only at the matches but at the practice. Whose parents are always there. Who's shuttling us off to the away games and so on and so forth. You start to see kind of, okay, cool, this is a different experience. And you can kind of see where the deficits are, where your parents leave before the sun is out. They come back late. They're frustrated. They're working low end jobs sometimes, and breaking their backs to just barely afford the school that you're in. So
were you aware of that at the time?
Of course,
because it's easy, growing up. You can grow up in a very challenging environment, and sometimes and not appreciate or acknowledge, how much sacrifices, your parents have to make for you to have the privilege of being exposed to an environment that is different, to where you live. And obviously, there's more than just the education, but there's also the entire ecosystem, that will remind you of the, differences of those two worlds.
Most definitely. I think I was fortunate because I came from a really stable family. My parents, thank God, are still alive today. They're still together. That sort of thing. So that for me, I was kind of grounded in that sense. And I'm very fortunate till today. But absolutely, and because your parents sacrifice so much, they don't let you forget that you come back. Then there's a letter from school saying this guy's not behaving or whatever. They remind you right there and then and say, hey, you're sending you to school and you're making sacrifices so you can so you become better. Don't mess it up. So those were the main kind of highlights in terms of the things that that kind of mold your identity and show you the space that you're growing up in. And then
Okay. And is there anything that you were doing at the time that you can relate to in terms of the design space? Maybe any form of interest, at the time, maybe, I don't know, a hobby or...
I wouldn't say hobby. I think growing up, my only hobby was probably rap music. And it was just an escape for me, and I was obsessed with that for most of my... I'm still obsessed with it now, but that was it. I was never... I did a bit of sports and stuff, but honestly, that was my only hobby. That was my only hobby. I was into rap music. I did anything that was associated with rap back in the day. But then I finished off my schooling. I went to a township school for about 2 years. My parents just couldn't afford that thing anymore. And then there was also just a bit of a culture shock, but it helped me. And I'll get to the design piece now. And it just helped me kind of realize that then I was back in the township and I was schooling with people from my neighborhoods. from other townships as well. And it was just a shock to the system initially, but it was also one of the biggest life lessons. I didn't like it when at the time, but then retrospectively, it was one of the best things that happened to me in my life.
So, like, how did that conversation start? Like, how did your parents say, Mpumelelo, kunje, this is the situation? And, like, I'm just wondering, like, what was the approach? And to deliver that message, how did you receive it?
Like, I think my parents were always real with me. We were never really shielded from the economics in the house and stuff like that. It's not. I never went to bed on an empty stomach. But this was like going to private school is a high bar. My mom was a nurse for quite a long time, and my dad, he worked in different businesses and stuff like that. But it was still quite a high bar. So, and like I said, on an ongoing basis, you kind of had this conversation, You know how it is growing up in a house. Like, can I have this? Can I have this? And they'll tell you, no, the financial reality is this. Yeah. So if it gets to a point where my dad says to me, we don't think that we can do this. It's not a surprise to you.
I mean, look, I can relate, in terms of hearing the message. To me, but to actually to have a conversation about it, and to be schooled that, hey, this is the situation. I think it's a privilege, and like, I'll be quite keen. Like, how many like black like parents or even like black children out there who actually have such a relationship with their parents. Just to understand, so that they have like a true sense of their financial situation.
Yeah.
And I know we always hear there's no money. But to actually understand, this is where we are as a family. So man, I mean, like, that is quite like an interesting, like, story. And so now, you said you had to finish off like the 2 years. Back to
the hood.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was just culture shock initially. It's ironic that somebody who grew up, who was living in the township, starts going to school with people that live in the township, and it's a culture shock. So that in and of itself told me that I was living in a bubble, and so on. So it's like, shucks, you get exposed and you realize that, and you start to appreciate. I started to appreciate where I came from in terms of my family, my household. It's like, shucks, this is the thing really that differentiates me from a lot of people.
To
say, the family that I come from and home and stuff like that, because I was starting to see how we're interacting at school and and so on. So and then you were asking how this kind of started to inform and relate to design. The one thing that really impressed on me is really that, I guess, inclusivity, let's put it that way, is important. Just as a whole, inclusivity is important. So it's important for us to understand the country that we live in, the culture that we live in, and to always strive to better that. Because there is some blatant imbalances, and we need to make active efforts towards kind of seeing how we can contribute to creating a balance.
No, that's cool, man. Like, I wish we can talk more about about that. There's some like more interesting stories that we can share about like our childhood, the upbringing, the perspective of the child, and also as we become parents, it's a very like interesting view to have, because you have to bundle like your view versus your view now versus the view that you had as a child. But man, as I said, right, there's value to share our story, and for people to understand that you didn't just wake up and become this person that others know of today, right? I mean, yeah. Thanks for sharing a bit about yourself, and I wanna move into the from like the personal space into the who is Mbumi, in terms of what you're doing,
Yeah.
and now you are working at Old Mutual. Just like tell us like what do you do?
Well, I guess my official title here
Yeah.
is head of UX.
Yeah.
But I guess UX here in Old Mutual sits primarily, we sit in the digital space. For UX, one of the most critical things in any organization is executive sponsorship.
Yeah.
If you don't have executive sponsorship, somebody as a UX team or somebody who heads up UX,
Yeah.
you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
You're gonna be evangelizing until the cows come home. So
yeah.
and it's important to take a break from evangelizing as a
Yeah.
central thing
Yeah,
that you
yeah,
do.
yeah.
Although we do it every day, but it shouldn't be central
Yeah.
to our job because we have a craft. So so yeah, that's essentially what I do. Primarily, I guess we started as supporting
Yeah.
the digital transformation program.
Yeah.
Now we're kind of starting to scale it beyond just the digital program that we were supporting. So I think next year March I'll be 4 years in Old Mutual. So we started with quite a small team. I brought on some people to kind of lead the UX space, and we've gone through ebbs and flows. Like I think we're at an ebb right now in terms of our central team. Holistically, if I include our interns, which I hope I can touch on a little bit later.
Yeah, sure,
About
definitely.
30 designers or so in the space, a little bit more probably in the space, and we still kind of run the design practice as like a central chapter that supports everybody, all the other designers that are in the space. And I think that's kind of maintained its structure quite well so far. But we can see that where the industry is going, where the company, where the organization is going, that's going to scale. So my responsibility then is really to kind of hold that together. What is going to take to build a good practice and a practice that can scale without diluting the quality of the work that we do. And for us to really realize customer centricity is in the work. It's not things that executives say. Right? How do we realize that? And that's really key to what we do, and that's really my responsibility. But I guess the main thing that I came to Old Mutual to also do is really kind of create a balance between the UX, the interaction design space, and the the UI space, right? The creative versus the more kind of theoretical, more interactive side. So that's kind of been a good journey for me because I have a very strong UX background. So kind of really trying to bring to par the UX and the UI in our spaces has been a really educational journey for me. And I'm hoping to take that forward. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what it is. So leading the capability, building it out, and making sure that it's scalable, not just in SA, but also across our Africa regions.
Okay. So actually, I want to come back to that. I think you've already given us I think a bit of understanding of what your role is. And also, I think it would be great for people just to understand, that because Old Mutual, operates in, many African countries, and how your role fits in, and how do you do what you do in South Africa, and making sure that your role is actually, stays intact, and the culture that you want to bring into the team stays intact, etc. But before we talk more about that, actually, I was quite interested to know. Today, you're the head of UX design at Old Mutual, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, how the hell did this guy get here? Because I also want to get here, So there are two questions actually, right? The first one is how did you start your career, and then I want us to talk about how did you become a UX designer. So Mpumelelo, at some point had to do 2 years of high schooling.
Yeah.
After being exposed to private life, going back to the hood,
Yeah.
Then your 2 years was up, high school. At some point, there was life post that. So I want us just just to highlight what happened to you, and yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think that's a quick one. That's a quick one.
Sure.
So yeah, I think after high school, again obviously my parents
Yeah.
couldn't. I didn't get a bursary or anything or sponsorship. So again, obviously my parents couldn't afford to take me to tertiary, and so I didn't go to varsity and do that whole stint. I didn't want to because I knew where I was coming from. I didn't want to be in a protracted type of broke situation, so to speak.
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, no, thanks a lot, for that. So the other question that I have for you is, how has the design space evolved since the time you started?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been some key milestones. Or turning points. I think I think when I started, obviously there was a lot of focus on usability.
Yeah.
Which is just really trying, acknowledging the fact that there's a scientific basis to design and understanding humans, and then formal kind of scientific methodical ways of testing whether a design is good or bad. Right? In a user-centered way. So the usability piece, even the certification then was a usability analyst certification. So it was very focused on interactive design, and just designing at that level. And then obviously the next evolution was kind of UX, which was now starting to embrace kind of the emotional side of it and not just the clinical aspect of designing for efficiency.
I use this thing?
So that was the next kind of breakthrough, where it says from usability to UX. And what does that mean? How does it, now a bit of more focus on also the visual design and making things pleasant, as much as they are usable. So that was the next thing, and I saw that also where we were working at that point in time to say, okay, cool, how do we actually get this thing right? But I mean, it was a battle. You were also probably still in your early UX days, seeing that it's a battle to actually get enough designers, and for those designers to be given enough time to actually not just do the usability piece justice, but to even do the UX piece justice, right? So I think there was also a breakthrough for me and added depth to what we were doing, and to say, oh shucks, actually there's this other aspect of it where we need to understand experience and how to research for experience and how to validate experience, not just whether people can do things, but how they feel in that experience. So that was the next thing. But then also I think one of the things that then started to also chart my path, my individual path, was also the appreciation of what supports designers doing design work, which was really what we loosely termed capability build. Right. Those were the things, because now you realize, okay, cool, there's designers, but there needs to be a leader who's concerned about enabling those designers, who's concerned about getting sponsorship, who's concerned about protecting those designers so that they're not stuck in meeting rooms trying to educate people on UX or usability. They actually need to be there contributing. So those are the things that I kind of saw. So I kind of saw this usability thing into a UX thing, and then into, okay, cool, how do these things actually kind of scale into I'm going to call it a department. Because in an organizational sense, how do you actually have a UX department? And I think between then and now, there's been a flavor of things, but primarily now coming into this focus, right? I'm going to leave the tech and stuff. Obviously, tech has moved on out of it, but the focus on digital products, I think, is now front and center. And now we're getting people calling themselves product designers, as opposed to whether they UX or UI or UX writers and so on. So that's the most recent thing for me that that also needs some discussion and
look,
interrogation.
Like I'd love us to have a conversation, about about that. But
I think it's a good one for the channel. I think we probably need to, you probably need to open that up as well. Let's get some views from the community. But I think that's really the things that I've seen. And then obviously, like I said, I don't want to talk too much about tech because there's been a lot of stuff in the tech, both in terms of design tools, and just tech in general that's changed. But in terms of our discipline, that's kind of it. Usability, UX, building practices, and then moving into being product designers.
Sure. Cool, man. Yeah. Look, I would really love us to talk about the different design roles. But since we are talking about that, I'd love to understand what kind of design roles do you have in your team and how are they structured?
Yeah. So I think let me talk about where we are and where we're moving to. Currently, we are at a point where we have UX and UI chapters within the design space. So the UX chapter lead, UI chapter lead, and both obviously just to focus on the depth of craft and skill within those spaces. Because I understand that there's depth in both and we need to do justice. So there's that. We also had a design system lead role, which is currently vacant because that's part of the enablement piece for the designers. So that's kind of how we're sitting at this point in time, and then we have design leads and UXs sitting within the different squads, then carrying out work, right? There's UX leads, there's UI leads, from empathizing to validation. So that's what they would do on a day-to-day basis. Obviously the lead, managing it, managing stakeholders, etc. So that's kind of a typical, the typical day-to-day stuff that happens within the design team. I manage the special projects, which also has like innovation and stuff for the chapter lead specifically. And whoever has time, obviously, within the delivery space and has interest to then contribute to special projects or to design system or whatever the case may be. So you kind of see a little bit of an overlap, but primarily, obviously, we need to churn out and support the business in delivering digital products and services.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we're on.
Yeah,
sure. So I want us to talk about. Actually, let me just drink some water. I'll cut that. So Mpumi, earlier on, right? You mentioned about some, job opportunities, and I'm actually quite keen for you to share to any designer that is out there that is looking for design opportunities. I want you to share, as a hiring manager, what do you look for in designers? What are like the 3 key things that are important for you?
Yeah, I think the most important thing really is craft. So looking for people that really have an appreciation for the need to be deep in your craft. So which is why I kind of favor specialization for the most part, and less of a generalist type of approach. So if you're a UX, if you're a UI designer, if you're a creative, or etc. So I think that's the thing. So for some reason, I'm not a sports guy, but I always kind of use the sports metaphor for even when I talk to people in my team, right, about skilling up. Is that, you need to be deep into your craft. So like if you're in the martial arts, you need to perfect certain techniques. You're going to go through it. You're going to practice and understand what sits behind that. Getting the technique perfectly. And it's the same thing for basketball players, football players, guys who are in team sports. So I think that's really important. I think that's key. because then you can build around that, right? You can build around that. That's really at the center of everything. So yeah, I think that's number one. People who are really passionate about their craft, and keeping that going and building depth to it, right? And then the second thing is probably, I would say, collaboration, right? It's a bit of a broad, vague thing to say collaboration, but I think it contributes at multiple levels. But let's start with the craft piece. People who don't really collaborate, especially in the UX space, I've seen anyway, based on my experience, that it's really difficult to get better at your craft if you don't collaborate. Right?
Yeah.
So if you think about somebody in martial arts who's trying to perfect their technique, right, they need to spar with other people to test themselves in the real world. That I am getting better at this thing. As much as I may have understood it fully, I may have read up about it, I may have practiced it by myself, but I need to interact with somebody else to get that feedback. It's the same thing for if you're into basketball, right? Yes, you can throw hoops all day and perfect the technique, but how do you do it in the middle of a game, in the heat of a game? And how do you do it? How do you coordinate it with your team members? That sort of thing. So I think collaboration has become key in that sense. And I'm really starting to get even more of an appreciation for that. I think initially I used to just want, does this person know what they're doing? And then you're like, okay, cool, this person is good for the team, but I think that collaboration and appreciating it, in both directions is really, really important. Because if you understand and value as a designer, if you understand and value collaboration coming in your direction, you then also appreciate it in that direction. So how you assess that, through conversations, etc. It's not a science, but that's what I'm trying to get better at doing. So craft, really openness to collaborate, is key. And the third thing, I think, I don't want to make it overly complicated, but it's like being able to articulate your experience is really important. Because like I was saying the other day, it's a bit unfair sometimes to make a lot of demands on people who are trying to look for jobs and say, hey, here's a case study, take a week out of your day to day. You don't know what pressures people have either at work or at home, etc. But you want to kind of assess people's capability and their experience. So it's really important that people are able to really speak to what they've done. And that's really something that I'm looking out for, to say, how well can people actually speak to their experience, especially as the more senior you get, you should be able to speak to it a little bit better. So out of that, then you can pick out things like, how methodically they go through stuff, what techniques they use, etc., and how they approach work, and also how they approach collaboration. Both within the design space and broader. So those are kind of the three high level things to me that I can speak to, craft, collaboration, and also being able to kind of tell a story about and speak to your experience. So whether that experience is 1 year, whether it's 10 years, whatever it is, right? Being able to actually speak to that, and speak to it as a, as an artist, or as a, as a practicing, as a practitioner, let's put it that way, right?
Sure, man. There's something that I want us to talk about at some point. How can we better assess, the quality of the design experience? Versus just the number of years that you've spent, But that's a topic for another day. And also, I know we've had a few conversations about the opportunity to date designers, to get to know them informally, trying to make it to be less about doing like job interviews, but that's something that is worth, having a chat with. Having
chat about.
Chat about. So thanks for that. And so for anyone who's looking, we'll definitely have Mbumi, and we can just do like a quick like online conversation about the job posts
Yeah.
that you have, and so that people can get a feel of the environment, so that maybe we can even like do like a live session, and do maybe like an ask me anything about the job specs, etc.
Okay.
To get so that designers can get clarity,
Sure.
and so that you can actually engage
Mm.
on the job spec, instead of like compiling
sure.
this thing and then
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I think
Mm.
that's a good idea. That's a
Yeah.
good idea. And yeah, I'm also learning, right? And I'm also trying to also just find new ways to approach how we hire talent, right?
Yeah.
And also, yeah, from both sides. How do I make the experience better for myself and my team?
Yeah.
And how do I make the experience better for people who are looking for opportunities and looking to solve different problems in the space? So yeah.
Sure. Cool, man. I'm making note of that. So I know earlier, right, when I asked you if you had Elon Musk's budget, how would you design your ideal dream design team?
Mm.
And you touched on a lot of things, and I just want you to elaborate on what you've said like earlier, right? In the context of this question, what does the future of UX design look like?
Yeah.
And this is an important question for designers at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
For a person who's at varsity, trying to finish off with their design-related, course, degree, and will there be jobs for me?
Yeah.
And for someone who's in the space, who wants to upskill themselves to set themselves up for opportunities within the UX space. So in context of that, right? I know on the 12th of January you're gonna have a design knowledge sharing session about what is the future of UX design.
Yeah.
But I just want you to touch a bit on that. You can share. Obviously, I don't want you to spoil, the topic. But yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. So, yeah, for me, I guess, yeah, we all as designers, I guess, think about, grapple with this question of what's the future. I think we can always address what it looks like for us as practitioners at the tools and process level. That's one conversation. But I think it anchors on these two things for me. And I'll touch on the third one. But one, I think it's about making. We started with human computer interaction, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But I think we want to kind of make that in today's world and in the future. We want to make that interaction as kind of implicit as possible, right? Cut down the interaction cost. I think that's a phrase that you like to use quite a bit, right? How do we eliminate it almost entirely, right? So kind of no UI is the best UI type of approach, right?
Yeah.
Which is why for me conversational design is one of which is what sits up behind voice UI, etc. Which is why I think that's one of the things we're going to need to focus on.
Yeah.
I think from looking in the future is how do we understand conversation? Because this is our primary way of communicating and interacting.
Yeah.
Right? It's through conversation. Yes, there's conversation at a text level, but then there's conversation at voice, etc.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? I think that's one of the design problems we need to lean into. The other thing is, I guess, you can't talk about the future without talking about AR and VR. And how do we then apply design method in those spaces, right? How do we also try and make things a little bit more seamless? So that space is obviously about really how do we connect people that are not in the same space, or how do we bring interaction into a different environment beyond kind of our physical constraints, and that's obviously quite progressive because we're trying to make the world smaller, etc. And I think that is overlaying this thing of making the UIs disappear and making the interaction more organic. In those spaces as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus in that space. There's going to be a lot of focus into that. And I think, being able to bring kind of conversational design into that space where you might be talking with you might be a bot in the metaverse, right?
Yeah.
And how do I interact with you in a way that's natural? That's,
You can say,
conversational design.
hey, but
So I think that's where it's going. I think those are the two main things.
So yeah, man. This is a question that I actually get a lot from young designers. So I thought I would save it for last. So for any young designer who's got a dream of becoming a head of UX one day, what would you say to them?
Sure. Yeah. I guess from a UX perspective, let's get your hands dirty, man, as soon as possible. Look at designs, see if you can replicate them. Learn the tools. So I want to contextualize this a little bit because we talk about the future of design, and then we talk about conversational design, AR, virtual reality, artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
But I think I guess it's almost like another sports metaphor, but it's a movie thing. But if you think about the Karate Kid, wax on, wax off.
Yeah.
You kind of really want to still play around with. Yes, understand technology and stuff and dabble with that stuff, but you also want to kind of understand the basic principles when designing basic UIs, right?
Yeah.
Designing forms, designing apps, and so on and so forth. But I guess at the core it is what makes design good, right? Beyond aesthetics, I think, the aesthetics thing is also deep enough. And, this is what we've also come to understand, that the UI design and aesthetics are also in and of themselves a deep specialization. But I think it's really about getting your hands dirty as a young designer.
Yeah.
Find tools, some of them are free, some of them are cheap, and start to design. Start to replicate those designs. That's the one thing. The second thing is an appreciation for the fact that you're designing something for humans.
Yeah.
Right? And you need to be able to talk to humans and have them give you feedback about what you're designing. So there's those two things really. It's about understanding users, designing for those users, and being able to go back and test the fact that whatever you've designed is good.
Yeah.
Right. So you can do this in a variety of ways. You can take somebody else's design and you can go and ask other people what they think about it.
Yeah.
You can try and replicate designs just to get your own skill and craft and experience up. But also, you can also try and understand before you start ideating and deciding, for instance, which designs you want to replicate or which of your own designs you want to ideate. You can also start trying and understand what do people want. So if you decide that you're excited about sneakers and you want to design a sneaker app or whatever the case may be, you probably want to talk to some sneakerheads and say, hey guys, what do you look for in a website or in an app for about sneakers? What is the thing that interests you the most? Because you want to know what good looks like. Okay, cool. Once you've understood the users, and come do something, play around, quick and dirty, or ideate, or even copy some stuff from online. But obviously, trying to recreate as much as possible, because that helps you in the wax on, wax off approach. It helps you get your own skill up and running, and then go back to those people and say, hey, what do you think of this thing? And try and listen. To whether you capture the same that people were saying before you designed it, right? And that's really it. I would say above anything else, those are the real fundamentals of it, right? Because they help you get, one, user-centered, and two, they help you with your skill. Right? And that will remain whether you're doing conversational design, whether you're designing for the metaverse or whatever the case may be. You will need this at their core. Understanding design tools and being able to design and understanding what good looks like from a user perspective. because you will naturally get into the actual design principles, best practice, etc. If you do that, if you immerse yourself in just that, right? And I don't want to make it seem too abstract or too academic, so to speak. But practically, that's it.
Sure.
Finding a way to understand, to talk to users and understand what they want, designing for that, and being able to go back to your friends or to your users and say, hey guys, what do you think about this? And just getting into that. Yeah, I think that's it. And these are really some more recent reflections of mine about how to become a designer. Because working with a lot of designers in our space as well, you realize that we kind of lose track of what's at the center of what we do. And we design a lot of flashy products, design, a lot of flashy products. And at the end of the day, like, how good are these products? Are we testing them with users? How well have we empathized and understood our users? And that gets kind of deprioritized, get lost along the way. So, and that's really, I think, the thing. Because if you think about it, if it's at the core of what we do, it shouldn't be something that falls away. And yes, there's different ways of understanding users today. We have a lot of sources of data and so on and so forth. But the mere fact that you have a deep appreciation for, I need to understand who I'm designing for, design and also validate for them, is, it will change over time with technology and stuff and data. But yeah, I think that's really it to me for new designers out there. Understand, design, and validate or test with users. That's the thing that we need to get into. Of course,
Sure, man. So no, thanks a lot, Mbumi. It's been a wonderful, session, and so guys, we had to move to a different meeting room. But